he did okay in 300,
Well, we went through a few generations of classes before we get to this class.
Yeah.
We started off teaching Introduction to Programming in assembly language.
Okay.
And not just any assembly language, it was the IBM mainframe computer assembly language, which is really strange by today's standard. A lot of instructions that we have these days, they don't have it. But back in the days, that's how they started teaching programming, was starting with assembly language programming. And then we changed to Pascal, which is a programming language that was intended for academic purposes, but it has no other place to go. It's a dead end. Okay, you learn Pascal, you learn the concepts, but you have to toss away the language construct itself because the syntax is not used anywhere else. And then we transitioned into this class, because we want the same class to basically offshoot to different other classes. So it took a few gyrations before we kind of got to this point. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We have our homework, passing by reference, take 2. So let's go ahead and take a look at that one first, because even if I am kind of behind in terms of grading, I still want to make sure that we understand the solution of the homework assignments. Is this one a little bit easier compared to the previous one?
Yeah.
I think it mostly has to do with the concepts. We talked about it a little bit more, and so now you guys have a better understanding of the concepts. So that's good. The other one, just remind me, if I forget to do it, just remind me to change it into extra credit. So that way it doesn't affect your bottom line, but for people who get good score in the other homework assignment, they get the extra points. So that way nobody gets hurt. And this is not a class where I grade by curve. So if everybody is moving up in terms of grade, everybody gains. I'm not just giving A's to the first 3 or 5%. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Let me turn off my phone's ringer first. Nope. All right. Okay, so this is the program that we are working with. We have basically 2 subroutines. One is a stub. You guys have any questions?
Talk about the homework assignment.
Okay, go ahead.
We're just explaining how it seemed kind of easier compared to the other one because it didn't go out quite as far, and towards the end it just it canceled out one of the columns, like we closed it out so we could just open another one.
Yes.
In the same columns. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one reuses 3 let's see, 1, 2, 3 columns. Because these 2 invokes on line 12 and line 13, they're going to reuse the same columns. Because you clear the first 3 and then you reuse the same 3 columns.
Yeah.
And in terms of concepts, this one only involves passing local variables by reference to another subroutine. But it doesn't mean that you don't need to know how to pass by reference to another thing that is also passed by reference. It's just that in this homework assignment, it's not there. All right, let's go ahead and save it first to today's folder, and then we'll work on it. We do have a practice test or practice exam today for exam number 2. So that's after we take care of this assignment. Okay. All right. There are no print statements. There are no conditional statements. So we can just start with line number. And there are no global variables. That means the precondition is very easy to state. There's nothing to say, really. The first line and the only line that is outside of the definition of a subroutine is line 15, so that's what we start with. It invokes stub. We have to remember where to return to. We have a return line number in this case to post. And then we also have a few other columns to set up because subroutine stub has 2 local variables. One is I. All local variables must be assumed to have unknown values. So you have to put a question mark here. And then the other one is J, which is also a local variable. And that's why we also give it a question mark to indicate that we don't know its initial value. Then we are ready to go into the subroutine stub and start execution in there, starting with line 10. Line 10 is an assignment statement. We are putting a 1 into I. So I gets a value of 1. On line 11, j gets a value of 2. And then on line 12, we invoke the other subroutine. The other subroutine is sub1. So now we also need to have a return line number. This time the return line number is the line that is logically following line 12, which in this case is line 13. But we also have to set up the parameters because we have two parameters. One is x and the other one is y. They're both passed by reference. In other words, x has to be an alias of some other column, and y also has to be an alias of some other column. X is an alias of x. Excuse me. X is an alias of I, and I is on column C. So we say this is also known as column C. Y, on the other hand, is we use j to specify y. J is in column D, so that's why y is an alias of column D. Are we doing okay at this point? How all the columns are set up, passing by reference.
Would it be an error? I would set up a as comments even though I didn't end up needing it. I mean, is it, when I set up my columns on the answer sheet?
So it shifts the x to column D and the y to column E.
Right. Right. So if I turn in it that way with the
as long as it's consistent,
column, even
that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. As long as it is consistent, with which column you actually use as column I and J, that's fine. Yep. The other interesting thing is the way we use the columns is it's something that I learned over the years, and I'm using this same concept now to teach cisp300, the assembly programming class. So this is not the last time you will see it if you take cisp300 from me, because in that class we'll use columns again, but in that class columns no longer represent whole variables and return line numbers. They actually represent the underlying mechanisms from the lowest possible level of how things are actually done. But it is really the same concept. So that's the funny part is when you see this stuff again in a different context, the context would be different, the class is more difficult, but it is still the same kind of concept. Yep.
What if I forget to do a question mark with the I and J?
I and J, what if you forget the question mark?
Yes.
You get some points deducted. Because it is important to remember that a local variable starts with unknown values. Yeah. But you won't get all the points deducted, it's just some. In this class, it doesn't hurt that much, but when you write a program in C and you forget the fact that local variables start with unknown values, then it's going to hurt. Because you can spend hours and hours and days to debug your program and go like, why? How come my program is not working? And each time it doesn't work, it seems to be somewhat random. Well, that's why. Okay. I just want you to recognize the importance of doing this, because doing this makes sure that you remember local variables start with unknown values, and that's a very important thing in programming. Okay, so now that we have set up columns E to G, we're ready to invoke subroutine 1, starting on line 4. Line 4 is adding x and y and then put the result back into x. X is an alias of column C, which has a value of 1. Y is an alias of column D, which has a value of 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. We want to store the 3. We want to store 3 back into x. X is an alias of column C. So column C is the one that gets updated to a value of 3. Is that okay so far? Okay. Then we have line 5, which is not much more difficult. We are doubling the value of y, which is an alias of D, and column D has a value of 2 at this point. 2 times 2 is 4. We store the 4 back into y, and y is an alias of column D. So column D is changed or updated to a value of 4. Then we go to line 6. Line 6 is the end of the subroutine. We look up the return line number to remind us that we have to continue on to line 13. Then we can just go ahead and deallocate these 3 columns. And we just use a strike through to represent that the columns are now deallocated. And now we're back to line 13 because of the return line number. Line 13 is, well, guess what? Another invoke statement. Okay, not very exciting because we have to do the same thing. We have to allocate a column for return line number. And because column E is already deallocated at this point, and we always allocate from the leftmost available column. We have to reallocate column E. Okay, you cannot, if people start with column H, that would be incorrect. We have to reuse column E in this case. Are there any questions about this part? That we have to reuse a column that has been deallocated already? Okay. And since we are invoking sub1, we still have parameter X and parameter Y to set up. The return line number is the line that is logically following line 14, which is, logically following line 13, which is line 14. And then we have to set up parameter X and parameter Y. Parameter X is the same as last time because I use local variable I, which is column C, to specify parameter X. So parameter X is also known as column C, just like last time. But Y is different because this time I also use I to specify Y. That means Y is also known as column C. Okay? Now there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing suspicious about it. This is just the way passing by reference works. So now we have two parameters, and they are both aliases of exactly the same column. Okay? Is that okay?
I thought it was a J. I didn't tell it was an I.
Oh. Okay, because they look almost the same.
Yeah, just a little curve. So
Yeah, just a little
I just
tail.
didn't catch the change in letter.
Okay. Did you also put an I here?
No.
Oh, man. If you did that, then I can say it's consistent, right? No, I can say that you're consistently missing the J, and I can refer a optometrist. Well, you probably get some points deducted, but probably not a whole lot, because I do want to test whether people know how to do this when we use the same parameter, in both, you use the same variable in two passing by reference parameters. So that's kind of an important thing, for this assignment.
Yeah, that's just my mind kind of assuming what should be there, because
Right.
something so similar was right next to it.
Our minds are very good at doing that, filling in details, and a lot of times it works, because if you need to see all kinds of details to actually do something, our ancestors would be dead already, because they don't have the time to do that. So a lot of times, your mind will fill in the details, just so that it's faster to process, information. But in the case of a homework assignment, especially in programming, it is important to be a little bit more careful. That's okay, it's not going to be a whole lot of points, missed, Okay, so now we have set up columns E and G, columns E, F, and G again, and this time we go back into the subroutine sub1, starting on line 4. Line 4, once again, is adding X and Y, but since X and Y are both referring to column C, now we have 3 plus 3 equals 6. And we put a 6 back into X. X is an alias of column C. So column C is the one that is now updated to a value of 6. On line 5, we are doubling the value of Y. And Y is an alias of column C. Column C now has a value of 6. 6 times 2 is 12. And we store the 12 into Y. Y is an alias of column C. And column C is the one that gets updated to a value of 12. Are there any questions about the row 14 and row 15 of the trace? So everybody gets this part? Excellent. Okay. So this is why you have to be careful when you pass something by reference, because it is possible to actually pass the same reference or references to the same variable to two different parameters. Okay, and when that happens, this is the behavior of the code. Then we get to line 6. The rest of the program is fairly trivial. On line 6, we look up return line number. We go back to line 14, and then we deallocate these 3 columns. Format cells, use a strike through, and then we get back to line 14. Line 14 itself is also the end of a subroutine. So that's what we do too. We deallocate these 3 columns, look up the return line number. It tells us to go back to post, and remember to put in the strike through to indicate these columns are now gone. And here we have the solution. This is the solution to the homework assignment. Are there any questions about this? Yep, go ahead.
On the test, are we going to see something more similar to this, or are we going to see?
Well, we'll see exactly what we'll see in the test in just a few moments.
Okay.
Very good. Okay. Any other questions, specific to the homework assignment? The questions? Okay. Well, it's about 20:08, so I think it's a good time to take roll. I haven't taken roll for a long time, for this class, so we'll just go ahead and see who's still in the class and who's not. So I'll start from here. Put your name next to your printed name, and that's all I need. All right, so this is all done. Let's go ahead and close this. And now we move on to the practice exam questions. And it is over here. Ooh, someone attempted that already. Wow. I'm impressed because I didn't put it up until, 12 o'clock last night or something like that. 12 a.m., that's this morning already, but it was late. Okay. Now these were actual questions that I asked, like about 2 years ago. So they were actual, exam questions. They were not watered down, just as a practice. So let's go ahead and take a look. All 4 questions, they will look like this. You have to download a file just like with the homework assignment, and work on the trace just like in the first exam. There are no pre and post conditions in this case, so every question is a trace. But this time we have our parameters to test. Okay, this is our first program. Doesn't look too bad. I think it's just. Let's take a look at the subroutine here. Okay, the subroutine is called divide, so that kind of gives away its functionality, what it is supposed to do. We pass by reference R, okay, and then we have 2 pass by value parameters, dd and dr, and then we have conditional statements here, a single conditional statement. If dd is less than dr, then we just do this part here and return 0. Otherwise, we return the invocation of divide plus 1, and the parameters are for the most part the same. The only part that is different, let me save it first so I can go in and edit it. The only part that is different is this part here. Okay. Come on. Let me change it. Okay. This is the part that is different. Instead of passing dd to dd, I'm passing dd minus dr to dd. So that's the only part that is different when I invoke divide from inside divide itself. And that's about it. Okay, I forgot to change this one to a real left arrow, so we'll do that here. All right. Are there any questions about the code itself, the pseudocode itself? No questions? Okay, let's go ahead and trace it. And the way I'll do it is I will move this kind of all the way to the bottom, except I want to make sure that people from the back can also see the last line, the line at the bottom. And then we'll do the trace in another window, as usual. This time we have to kind of leave enough space so that we can see the source code. And a portion of the trace is already pre-formatted, and this is just your starting point. So basically we have a single global variable, which is x, and x starts with an unknown value, and that's my precondition. And line 12 is the first line that is outside of the definition of a subroutine, and all it does is to initialize x so that x becomes 17. So it's not a difficult thing to do. And then on line 13, we have a print statement. But the print statement is not printing something that we know already. It's printing the result of invoking divide. So the first thing we have to do in order to finish the print statement is to invoke divide. But that means when we set up return, the return info of divide, we have to say when we come back from the invocation of divide, we have to come back to line 13 because there are certain things on line 13 that is not done yet. The part that is not done yet is the printing of the value returned by the subroutine. Is that okay so far? Okay. And we can actually make this a little bit wider because I kind of kept the source code around here. All right. Well, when we invoke divide, we have to supply several parameters. There are 3 parameters involved. One is R, one is DD, and one is DR. Let's figure out what we are passing to R. We are using X, the variable X, the global variable X, to specify R. The global variable X is living in column C, so R, because it is passed by reference, become an alias of column C. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. DD is passed by value, which means whatever X has, which is 17, is whatever DD has at this point. DR is also passed by value. In this case, we use the value 7 to specify DR, so DR starts with the value of 7. Yep.
So if it's a double-sided arrow, then anything that happens to column R is going to affect column X.
Because R is an alias of
Yeah.
column C.
But if it's a single-sided arrow, those just are independent. So if anything happens to DD, we don't move what happens back to X. It's just happened to DD.
That is correct.
Okay.
Because a passed by value parameter is just like a local variable, except its initial value is controlled by the invoke statement. And after the invoke statement, they're on their own. They don't have any ties to anything anymore. It's up to the subroutine to decide what to do with them.
Okay.
Okay, so now we are done with setting up the columns. We are ready to go into divide, starting with line 5. Line 5 is comparing DD to DR and ask, okay, are they, is DD less than DR? Well, DD is 17, 17 is less than 7 is false. Okay. Well, if that is false, we have to go to line 9 to continue execution, the line, of the else portion. All right, so let's go ahead and split this screen so that we can, focus on different portions of the trace at the same time. On line 9, we have a return statement. But the return statement is not returning a value that we know already. It is returning the result of the invocation of divide. So that means it is time to set up divide again. I can just copy and paste the header of the columns because they are exactly the same as last time. But the content of these columns are a little bit different. Because when we return from divide on line 9, we have to go back to line 9 again because the return action itself is not done yet. So that means the return info in this case is line 9, and we'll just return whatever is the return value of invoking divide, and then there's a +1 at the end here. So don't forget the +1 at the end. Okay. Basically, you just turn the invocation that you're dealing with into a single question mark. Everything else on that line should remain intact. Are we doing okay so far with that concept? Okay. What is R? Well, let's see. R is, I use my R to pass to the parameter R. My R, which is column E, is an alias already, and we never pass an alias of an alias. So when we pass R to R, we are just copying the alias itself. We are not making an alias out of an alias. What are we passing to DD? Well, we are passing DD minus DR, and once again, whatever is on the left-hand side of the right arrow refers to the current context, which is up to column G. So we are basically just looking at DD, which is 17, minus DR, which is 7, and the result of the subtraction is 10. And then DR is just DR itself. DR, is 7, so we are just passing the 7 along. So these are the four columns that we are setting up for this new invocation of the subroutine. Are we doing okay so far on row 8 of the trace? Still doing okay? Okay. Once we set up the columns, we go to invoke the subroutine divide, which means we have to start execution from the beginning again, which is line 5 in this case. Line 5 is asking, is dd less than dr? The answer is no, because dd is 10, dr is 7. 10 is less than 7 is false. Well, we don't have a choice, but we go to line 9, and we can copy a little bit more this time. I will copy like most of it, with only one part that has to be changed. Which part do I have to change? That is correct. dd is the difference between 10 and 7, which in this case is 3. Now it is time to go back into the subroutine, starting on line 5. Line 5 is asking, is dd, which is 3 this time, less than dr, which is 7 in this case? The answer is yes. It is finally true, which means we don't have to do any more recursion at this point. We continue execution on line 6 because the condition of the conditional statement is true. And that just changes r to the value of dd. What is r? R is an alias of column C. Column C is over here. So this is the cell that I need to change. It is changed to the value of dd. dd at this point has a value of 3, and that's what we are doing. Are we doing okay so far with line 13, row 13 of the trace? Okay. Now we move on to line 7. Line 7 is a return statement. When you execute a return statement, the only thing you have to do is to look up the return info cell, copy and paste it, change the question mark to the value that we are returning. In this case, it is 0. And that's it.
Why is it 0?
Because line 7 says return 0.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. After line 7, we are done with the conditional statement. We go all the way out to the end of the subroutine on line 11. Line 11 has two things to do. One is to tell us where we are supposed to go back to, which is line 9. And the second thing it has to do is to deallocate the columns. So here we deallocate this bunch of columns, indicate so, and cells, and change the stripe through, like that. And now we're back to line 9. But when we get back to line 9 now looks like this. Looks like L14, the cell L14. In other words, we are now ready to execute the return statement because we know exactly what value it is supposed to return. What value is it supposed to return again? 1. Very good. So we are executing return 1 at this point, but the context is no longer column L to whatever column, the other 4 columns. The context now is from column H to column K. So when we execute return 1, we have to use this particular return info. Copy and paste it, change the question mark to the value that we are returning. Which value are we returning again?
0.
1. We are executing this statement, which is returning 1, so we replace the question mark with a 1.
We're going to 9, and then we're going to 9 again.
We are unwinding the recursion.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter whether it's really the same line because we just follow the instruction here. If the return info tells me to go back to line blah blah blah, I go to line blah 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 to continue execution. Okay. But we don't execute this statement here, and we do not simplify it. Okay, I would not do any simplifications. Okay, because it is not the job of a return statement to simplify the statement. Its only job is to replace the question mark with something else. That's its only job. There's no simplification. Okay, now we move on from line 9. We get out of the conditional statement. We get to the end of the subroutine, and now we say, okay, let's look up the return info here. We're supposed to go back to line 9. Okay, and after we utilize the value of return info, we can now go ahead and delete or deallocate these columns. Let me try the function key, Control-1, cool. Control-S, cool. I don't have to use the mouse. All right, so now we're back to line 9. But when we get back to line 9 this time, line 9 looks like this, return 1 plus 1, which means there are no more invocations I need to do. Return 1 plus 1 is the same as return 2. So now we have to change our context to the one that we should be in. Okay. This is the context that we are in at this point. So when we execute return to, we are going to copy and paste this cell here, move it here, and then change the question mark to the value that we are returning, which is 2. That's the extent of the return statement. When you execute the return statement, you just copy and paste the return info cell, change the question mark to whatever value we are returning, and that's the end of it. After line 9, we go to line 11. And once again, line 11 is the end of the subroutine. We do the 2 things that we are supposed to do. First is look up the return info cell. That tells me I have to go to line 13 next. And line 13 now looks like this. I know exactly what to print when we get back to line 13. But since we are on line 11, we do have the other thing that line 11 has to do, which is to deallocate all these columns. So let's see, Control 1, Alt S, and change that to single. And now that we're back to line 13, our context is all the way back to the beginning. And we're supposed to print a value of 2. So we'll go ahead and print 2 over here. And there are no additional lines after line 13. So we're getting to post, and that's the end of this trace. So did I name this subroutine correctly? Did it do any type of division? It is really easy to lose sight of what the big picture is when we're drilling into the details and with all the return mechanisms and whatnot. Okay, what is 2? 2 is 17 divided by 7. Okay, but what is 3? What is the value 3 in that division? It's the remainder. Yep. So this subroutine will figure out what is the quotient of a division and also the remainder at the same time. It's doing the division in a very long way. Basically what an elementary school student would do is to keep subtracting it until there's not enough to subtract anymore, and it'll keep track of how many times it has to do the subtraction until until the dividend is less than or equal to the divisor. Excuse me, less than the divisor, because if it equals to, you still have to increment the quotient. Okay. Yep.
What's the difference between print and return?
Okay, print does not do anything other than just printing it to the screen. But it does not, specify the return value. It does not do anything to the return info cell. The return statement does. So the print statement is nothing more than just a way to print out the result of your calculations, because there's no other way to indicate what we are going to do with the result of the calculation. Return, on the other hand, is going to take the return info cell, copy and paste it, and change the question mark. Are there any other questions about this particular trace? No questions? This is all good? Okay. The nice part is, if you do have any questions, you can, first, try to watch the video, again, and see if, that gives you, some idea. If not, you can always, just send me an email or come to my office hour. So we'll go ahead and make sure we save this particular file, and then we'll close it and move on to the next question. Now, since, this class took the test online last time too, right? So we already know how to do all this stuff. Okay, so we can just move on. I have one student in one class who, said it's better to take the test on paper. But that's just one. Okay, second question, same format. Okay, download the file and then work on it. This one is called factor because it is something that we have seen already. It's just we haven't seen it in the subroutine format. So let's take a look at the algorithm first. And I'm hoping that most of you will recognize this particular algorithm. And I think the trace of this one should not be any problem. Here we go. Okay, this is the pseudocode, Haven't we seen something like this before? We have seen this when we talked about divide and conquer, top-down design, because I used the factoring program to illustrate the concept. And in order to factor a number down to its prime components, you need a subroutine to help you, and that's my find factor subroutine. Okay, its only job is it is given a number n, and its only job is to figure out what is a prime factor of n. Okay, so let's go ahead and trace this one. I don't think this one is going to be any problem at all. Move on to sheet 2. The comment area is kind of long because we have a fairly big expression here to evaluate. Okay, let's start execution on line 14, and we just have to set up one parameter and one local variable in this case, and also the return info. The return info in this case is pretty easy because we just have to go back to line 14, and the only thing left on line 14 to do is to print out the value that is returned by the subroutine. Then we have to set up the parameters of the subroutine. We have n, which is passed by value. The invocation on line 14 specifies a value of 6. So n as a parameter is starting with a value of 6. On the other hand, we have another variable, local variable here called f. And since it is a local variable, it starts with an unknown value. And this is our starting point. Any questions about this? Once we set up the columns, we go into the subroutine. The subroutine starts on line 4. Line 4 is the first line that actually has an action. The action is to initialize f to 2. So f gets a value of 2. On line 5, we evaluate the condition. Okay. F times f is less than n is true. N mod f does not equal to 0 is false. So the entire conjunction is false. Well, let's see if that's the case. Okay, f is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 is less than 6 is true. Okay, when you have a conjunction and the left-hand side is true, you cannot do the short circuit thing and say, oh, I know the whole thing already. Because with a conjunction, when one side is true, there's still a chance to make the entire thing false. So that's why you have to evaluate the right-hand side too. The right-hand side is n mod f does not equal to 0. What is n? N is 6. 6 mod 2 is the remainder of n of 6 divided by 2. 6 divided by 2 has a remainder of 0. 0 is different from 0 is false. So you have true and false, which means the entire thing is false. Okay. So that's why I said this is a really easy and quick trace, because the condition is false to begin with. You don't even have to go through the loop once. And then we get to line 8. On line 8, we compare f times f to n. F times f in this case is 4. 4 is greater than 6 is false. So let's document that. F times f is greater than n is false. So we don't go into the conditional statement at all. And then we go to line 11 next. Line 11 is going to return the value of f. So we take the return info cell, we copy and paste it, and then we change the question mark to the value that we're returning, which is the value of f, which is 2. And then we are done with line 11. We go to line 12, which is the end of the subroutine. The first thing we do is to look up the return info cell that reminds us to go back to line 14 to continue execution. And then the other thing we have to do is just to deallocate these 3 columns. Control V, Control 1, Shift, Alt S, and single like that. When we get back to line 14, the only thing left to do is to print out the value. So we say we will print a value of 2, and we are done. So this is a fairly simple trace. Any questions about this one? The only thing that is quote-unquote tricky about this one is you have to remember what is mod. But you can, since the test is open book, open notes, I mean, you should know how to find out what mod is. Or just Google it. Mod is a fairly common name for this operator. In some of my classes, I have seen students copy the entire question and paste it in Google and try to look for the answer, which in general does not work. All right, so that's this. And let's move on to the third question. Okay, same format. It's the same format all the way. Okay, this one is called power 2, so I think most of you already know what it is supposed to do. It finds a power of 2. It calculates a power of 2. But let's see how it gets the job done. Okay, it gets the job done using a subroutine that invokes itself. Okay, and it has the same field as the first program in a way that it returns the value of the invocation, but that's something that we know how to deal with already. So let's go ahead and trace this program. First, we have to save it first. All right. Okay. Line 10 is the only line that is outside of the definition of the only subroutine in this case. So we start with that. We don't know what to print until we return from the invocation of power 2. We need a return info in this case to remind us that we have to go back to the same line, which is line 10. But when we get back, we have to print out the return value of the invocation of the subroutine. But when you're invoking a subroutine, you have to set up the additional columns, which is, in this case, just a single parameter. The single parameter is n. The invocation specifies 3 to pass to n. And that's all. Those are the only 2 columns I have to set up in order to invoke power 2. We get into power 2, the first line to execute is line 3. On line 3, we compare n to 0. N equals to 0 is false. So we have to go to line 6, which is the else of the conditional statement, and that's a recursion. That's okay. We basically say, do we know what we're supposed to return? No, because we have to invoke power 2 in this case. So that's why we have to set up return info again. And when we come back, we have to finish up the return statement. So that means the return info should say, come back to line 6 when we are done, and use whatever value is returned to return here.
You're forgetting the times 2.
Hmm?
You covered up the times 2.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about the times 2. Otherwise, that won't work. Huh? Okay, so we have a times 2 here. Yep. So remember that part. You have to copy and paste the entire line and change the invocation itself to a question mark. But everything else on that line should remain intact. And then we have to set up n. N in this case is the current n minus 1. The current n is column D at this point. 3 minus 1 is 2. So you can see this one is just going to be tedious because you just have to keep going like this, for a few steps, for a few times, and then you come back and everything is done. But we'll go ahead and trace the whole thing. When you're done with setting up the columns, we go to line 3 of the subroutine. N equals to 0 is false again. You go to line 6. And then we set up these columns pretty much the same way, except n is changed. Because this time n becomes 1. And then you go into the subroutine on line 3 again. N equals 0 is false again. You go to line 6. You invoke the subroutine again. So I just copy and paste the whole thing. And this time n becomes 0, because 1 minus 1 is 0. And then we go back to line 3 again. This time n equals to 0 is finally true. That stops all it stops the recursion because we just return a value of 1 in this case on line 4. Well, when you return 1, all you have to do is to look up return info cell, copy and paste it, and change the question mark to the value that you're returning. It does not matter at all that return info itself is specifying a return statement itself. It does not matter at all. You just copy and paste it, and then you change the question mark. That's all that you have to do when you execute a return statement. Does that doing okay so far? And we don't do any simplification here either, because this is not the time to execute it. So we don't do any type of simplification. We just change the question mark, we're done. After line 4, we get out of the conditional statement. We go all the way to line 8, which is the end of the subroutine. We look up return info. It tells us we have to go back to line 6, fine, and then we deallocate the 2 columns. Control 1, Shift S. Ooh, okay, I can do the whole thing using keyboard. Okay, so now we're back to line 6. But line 6 now looks like this. It is return 1 times 2. 1 times 2 is 2. So we are changing the question mark to 2 in this case, because we are executing this statement, but it is acting on this part here. Is that okay? Let me just say that again, because someone is going to watch this again, and I want to make it very clear. On row 17 of the trace, we are executing the statement that is indicated by cell I-15, but it is acting on this particular cell. So that means we are returning a value of 2, but we are using this to copy and paste and change the value of 2, or change the question mark to a value of 2. We do not simplify 2 times 2 is 4 at this point. After line 6, we get out, we go to line 8. Line 8 is the end of the subroutine. We look up return info, tells us that we have to go back to line 6, and then we have no use of these columns anymore, and this time we can just copy and paste without having to do the strikeout again. And now we're back up one more level. When we look this up, when we're back to line 6, we're executing this statement. G17 specifies the statement that we are executing. E7 is the item that we are acting on. We're changing that one. So we copy and paste the return info cell, and then replace the question mark with 2 times 2, which is 4. And that's the end of the execution of line 6. We go to line 8. Line 8 says, let's go ahead and find out where we're supposed to go back to. We're supposed to go back to line 6, and then we can deallocate the 2 columns. At this point, it's mostly just tedium, because now we're back to line 6. But when we are back to line 6, we have to execute the statement, which is in E19. It is returning 4 times 2. We are going to act on C4. So we copy C4 to over here, and then we change the question mark to 4 times 2, which is 8. And then we go to line 8. On line 8, it is just the end of the subroutine. It reminds us to go back to line 10 next, and then we deallocate those 2 columns, and we are done with the invocation of the subroutine. Now we are back to line 10, but line 10 now looks like C21, which means we know exactly what value we are supposed to print. We're supposed to print the value of 10. There are no statements after 10, and now we get to post, and we are all done. So this one is mostly just tedious. Okay, it really should not be difficult, because it's the same thing happening over and over again. And as the name implies, we are calculating 2 to the power of n, because in this case we are calculating 2 to the power of 3, which is 8. Any questions about this one? No? Okay. There are no questions, we save it, and then we close, and then we move on to the last question. Here's our last question. Okay. And let me zoom in a little bit here. This is the excuse me. This is the pseudocode. And this one does have the concept of an array, which is passed by reference, because you can see the bar, A bar, and the square bracket symbols. But it is not really that much more than a normal subroutine. So let's go ahead and trace it, okay? Because we should be able to do this now. Sheet 2 starts with starts with an array that is already initialized, because if it's not initialized, we can't do it. So let's go ahead and do it. And first, we have to save the file to today's folder. we start with sheet 2. This one does involve recursion, but at this point recursion should not be too difficult to do, because the mechanism of invoking a subroutine and returning from a subroutine does not change. All right, after pre we go to line 14. Line 14 is invoking what. In this case, what does not return the value, so return line number is just fine. The return line number of 14 is post, because there's nothing after line 14. Then it has 2 parameters and 1 local variables. The first parameter is a, then we have parameter I, and it has a local variable x. Local variable x always starts with an unknown value, so we take care of that one first. Parameter I, we use a 0 to specify I, so we put a 0 here. And we only have parameter A to deal with. I use B to specify parameter A. B is an array that occupies column C to column E. So A is an alias of that, which means A is also known as column C to column E. It's a reference to column C to column E. And now we have all 4 columns set up, and it's time to continue execution in the subroutine, starting on line 5. Line 5 is asking, does I equal to bar A bar minus 1? Well, let's find out what is A. A is also known as column C to column E. Column C to column E is an array of 3 elements, so that means bar A bar is the same as bar B bar, which is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. I is 0 at this point. 0 equals to 2 is false. We move on to the else case. We go to line 8. Okay, here's line 8. Yep.
So when we use the bar A bar, we don't care about what the values of the columns are. We just care about how many are in the array.
Yes, that is correct.
So since there's 3 values, it returns
There are 3 elements.
3 elements. It returns 3. So we don't care about the 2, the 5, and the 1 yet.
That is correct. The values of those columns do not matter. We are just counting how many elements do we have in those columns. And in this case, we have 3 elements. That's why bar A bar is effectively bar B bar, which is 3. Okay, very good. Good question. Now we are down to line 8. Line 8 looks kind of complicated, but it really is not too bad, because we already know what is bar A bar, which is bar B bar, which is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. I has a value of 0 at this point. 2 minus 0 is 2. So this is the term or the expression inside the square bracket is really just 2. And A bracket 2 is the same as B bracket 2, which has a value of 1. So x ends up with a value of 1 in this case. Are we doing okay this time? Okay. After line 8, we have to go to line 9, and line 9 is going to do a recursion. And I think we probably should be doing this. Split the screen and probably make these a little bit shorter so that we have a little bit more space. So, okay, we're going to invoke what again? The only thing that gets changed in this case is I plus 1, and also the return line number. Okay. So we do a copy and paste. Excuse me. And the return line number is whatever line that is logically following line 9, which in this case is line 10. A is passed to A. It is already an alias, so we don't change anything. I becomes I plus 1, so I becomes 1. And x is still a local variable, so having a question mark is perfectly fine. So this now becomes our new context. We start execution from the beginning again, which is on line 5, which is asking the same question. I equals to bar A bar minus 1 is false, because bar A bar minus 1 is 2. I has a value of 1. 1 equals 2 is false. We go to line 8 again. And this time we want to put into column M, which is my local variable x. Bar A bar is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. I is 1 now, so 2 minus 1 is 1. So this means we are using A bracket 1 to put into x. But A bracket 1 is the same as B bracket 1, which has a value of 5. So we put the 5 over here. On line 8, and then we go to line 9, which is the invocation of the subroutine again. So we copy and paste these few cells. We change the I to 2 because we are using I plus 1 to specify I, so I is incrementing with each invocation. And then we continue execution in the subroutine starting on line 5. On line 5, we do the comparison again, but this time I, which is 2, is the same as bar A bar minus 1. So this condition is finally true. When it is true, we go to line 6. Line 6 is just copying A bracket 0 to A bracket I. A bracket 0 is the same as B bracket 0, which has a value of 2. We are copying the 2 to A bracket I. I has a value of 2, so we are copying that to A bracket 2. A bracket 2 is the same as B bracket 2, so B bracket 2, which is column E, is the one that is updated to a value of 2. Do we have any questions on line 15? Yep.
Yeah, would you do that one more time?
Okay. I need a TiVo, kind of make it so we can just go boop,
Skip
boop,
back.
boop, boop,
You
boop.
rewind it, yeah.
Yep. Okay. Well, now I have to do it manually using the organic TiVo.
I don't understand how you got to the B bracket 2.
Okay, let's figure that out. Okay, we are on line 6 right now. On line 6, what is the right hand side is easy, right? The right hand side is A bracket 0. A is a reference to column C to column E. In other words, A is a reference to array B. Array B has B bracket 0 equal to 2. So the right hand side of line 6 is 2. Is that okay?
Okay.
So we know what we're dealing with 2 on the right hand side. The question is, where are we storing the value of 2? Okay, the left hand side is A bracket I. I has a value of 2. So we are dealing with A bracket 2 effectively. Is that right?
AKA B bracket 2.
AKA B bracket 2. Exactly. And B bracket 2 is in column E, and that's why column E is the one that gets updated to a value of 2.
Okay.
Yep.
So basically you're just taking the value of B bracket O and updating B bracket 2 to its value.
That is correct. Yep, that is correct. Because every time you say A, you're basically saying B. Because
It's
A
a reference.
is an alias, it's a reference to B.
Which is the array.
Which is the array, right? So this is a trickier line, because of that. But you just have to work on it one step at a time, and everything should be okay in this case. We don't have to do any recursion this time because line 6 is the end of the then portion of the conditional statement. So we get out of the conditional statement, we go to the end of the subroutine on line 12. You just have to copy and paste the header and remind us to go back to line 10 next first. And then we just paste this part, Control 1, Shift S, Enter. Okay, I should write a macro to do that now. In fact, why not? Let's do it. Well, okay, when we get back to line 10, we can do that. Okay, so now we're back to line 10, but column N to the other column, they're basically all gone. So now when we execute line 10, we are using the context of column J to column M. And all that wants to do is to store the value of X into A bracket I. X has a value of 5, that's my right-hand side. The left-hand side is A bracket I has a value of 1. But since A is an alias of B, or a reference to B, A bracket 1 is the same as B bracket 1, which is column D. So column D is the one that gets updated with the value 5 here, okay, which is fine, okay. And then we move on after line 10 to the end of the subroutine on line 12. Line 12 is the end of the subroutine. We first look up the return line number to tell us to go back to line 10. And then we just go ahead and copy and paste everything. Copy and paste the header and then change that to strike out. So Control 1, strike through, done. Now we're back to line 10, but the context has changed again. This time it is from column F to column I. When we execute line 10 using those columns as my context, I has a value of 0 and X has a value of 1. So when we carry out the assignment on line 10, X is now 1, and we are changing A bracket 0, which is B bracket 0. So B bracket 0, or column C, now has a value of 1. And then we move on to line 12. And the same thing, we just have to remember where to go back to. This time it is post. And then we deallocate the 4 columns. And since when we get back to post, we are done because there are no additional statements to execute. Yep.
So what exactly is this subroutine?
It swaps. It swaps the last element with the first, the second last with the second, and so on. So basically, it just do something like this.
Okay.
But it does so in a recursive fashion.
Okay.
Yeah, it's basically a swap. Okay, it is swapping the first with the last, the second with the second last, and so on.
It'll reverse a whole array.
Yes. Now the middle one does not get changed because you can swap with itself, but that doesn't really do anything effectively. But if I give you an array of 4 elements, it will swap the middle 2. Okay. Are there any questions about this particular question? No. This is all good. All right. So let me save it.
Have you written the questions for the test yet?
Nope.
You should make that macro.
Download my consciousness onto the computer. They have a TV series about that. It's called Max Headroom. Many of you are way too young to even have heard of that name. Okay. This is definitely out of the context of this class, but I will ask questions about Max Headroom. Yeah.
It's the guy that stutters and stuff from the 80s.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but it's a great show. You guys have to watch it to appreciate how much of what they talk about in that show is now reality. Okay, this is back in the good old days, where TV is just TV. Okay, the internet was way in its infancy. I think only universities, for the most part, have access to the quote unquote the internet. People were using modems and going to BBSs, at the time. So something like this is like, yeah, right, like it's gonna happen, right? But in reality, the vision is actually fairly dead on. Okay, it merges, computer network and computers with television and entertainment. And guess what we have now? Okay, most of you do not use, just broadcast TV anymore. Most of you have cable of some kind, either Comcast or DirecTV or something like that, or you just watch everything from your computer. And this is it. Okay, the only part of Max Headroom that is not reality yet is the AI portion. Okay, because Max Headroom is supposed to be the alter ego or the downloaded consciousness of the main character of the show. He's called Max Headroom because there was an accident. I think it is not an accident. He was being chased, and he was he riding a bike? I cannot remember how it happened, but he had to jump on a ramp, and right before he passed out, the last thing that he saw was maximum headroom in a parking lot. Okay, so when they downloaded his consciousness, the first thing he remembered that popped up is max headroom, maximum headroom, and that's how the alter ego, got its name of max headroom. But it's basically an AI or artificial intelligence, entity that can go within the network, and it can go from one television set to the next and do kind of strange stuff.
Wasn't there one time where analog television
it got taken over by somebody or got hijacked by somebody, like a news network, and it was some guy wearing like a Max Headroom mask. And
I would not be surprised.
I think it was back a little while ago when it was still like analog TV.
Mm-hmm. With analog TV, it's a little bit harder to do, but with digital TV, it's not difficult anymore.
It was a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, these days, have you guys been following Anonymous or Anon, in short?
They're doing
Oh,
something against
the hackers?
Sony.
Sony, yeah.
Yeah, but they are doing things not only to Sony anymore. They're now tracking down the CEO and the higher ups, of the Sony management.
They were
and
mad about the actions against GeoHot.
Right, but what Anon is doing now is trying to dox the kids of the executives of Sony, find out which school they go to and try to pull pranks on the kids at their schools. So there were some people on the anonymous network basically saying, well, this is a little too far. I did not sign up to do something like this. So it's getting personal this time. It's not just against the corporation or just the CEOs of the corporation. They're now going after their families and whatnot. So
there was some interview with a woman where live that the woman started berating whoever they were talking to, who was the representative, and so they're like, oh, okay, well, we've just taken over your side or whatever, and they just right then they just crashed it and put up their own stuff. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
She was like, you can't stop us.
I feel like I just did.
She's like, no, you didn't.
Yep.
Why against Sony?
Why?
Because
Why
they
are they
took
cracking?
actions against GeoHot for cracking the PS3 or whatever Sony made.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the PS3.
GeoHot cracks all the OSs on the game console so people can do what they want with their own game consoles. And Sony didn't like that.
Not a bit.
Sony's a control freak.
Yeah, Sony is more of a control freak, I would say, than say Nintendo, because people have cracked Wii from the very beginning, and I don't think Nintendo has really done much other than using the latest updates to try to stop all that stuff. But I don't think they have taken any legal actions just yet with the Wii. So I don't know. I mean
classically Sony, they've written all their, they had Betamax, they used, mini discs, they use what's their like compact flash cards that are like different
memory stick. They have their own memory stick.
They want to control their own stuff, and they create it and then they lock it down, and so it never catches on. It may be better than the other thing, but because it's not open, it never catches on.
Yeah, but they never learn from all those past incidents.
Yeah.
And they even put a rootkit into audio CDs once. You guys just have to look it up. Yeah, just look up Sony and rootkit, and you will find it. There's a long, big Wikipedia entry on that as well. Yeah, that didn't go very well, did it? Once people found out that just putting your audio CD. I'm not talking about anything that has software that is supposed to have software. When you put your CD into the CD tray and just say, "Oh, I want to listen to my audio CD on my regular computer," it automatically installs what we call a rootkit into the computer. And the rootkit, I think, is monitoring what you do with the CD. So that if you make a copy of the CD or try to encode or transcode, the tracks on the CD, the rootkit, the program that is hidden in the rootkit, can detect that. Did it stop, or did it just detect and send it back to mothership?
No, it would there was a while there where any Sony CD, it was hard to rip to MP3. She had to kind of finagle it around because it had the software on it.
Yeah, so if you just look up Sony rootkit, the Wikipedia has a fairly long article on the whole thing. Basically just explaining how it happened, who discovered the problem, and why the rootkit is a big problem. It's not only because the rootkit itself is a bad idea. Basically, what a rootkit is malicious software that is installed on your computer, and it has special mechanisms to cloak itself. Okay, so it is really difficult to get discovered. But what they found was this particular rootkit also opens up all sorts of security holes for other malicious software to exploit. So it's basically drilling holes, security holes in your system that probably was not very secure to begin with because it's Windows, right? And And they're doing it using an audio CD. This is not, you going to a really questionable gambling website and say, oh, download this software and you will win, gamble every single time. This is just a plain audio CD that you bought from the store.
They paid for it.
Yeah, so they are penalizing. They are basically, they're penalizing exactly the same people who paid the money to buy the CD. The people who make copies of the tracks will never encounter this problem. So, very bright, very smart of Sony to do this.
They even use parts of DLC and open source.
Did it? Oh, is that right
They
here?
violated the GNU Lesser General Public License. And
Oh,
the
that's
General
right.
Public License. But we're going to use free code and charge you for it. Destroy your computer. That's awful.
Yep. Just yesterday, I have another student who complained to me about DRM, digital right management. I cannot remember. I think it was a game. He was trying to run a game that needs constant network connectivity to authenticate. I cannot remember which one. He mentioned that, but it didn't register in my head. But it was a game that is supposedly has a single-player mode. That you don't need to hook up to a network to play. But for authentication purposes, to make sure that you are you and you have purchased the game, it wanted constant connectivity to the net.
I had one exactly like that back in the day. It was a single-player game. There was no online play. I think it was like Phantasy Star Universe for the PC. But you had to have internet to start the game. Or you couldn't get any farther than that.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say something, but since it's still being recorded, I would not say it. Yeah, because I think someone can say you violated the DCMA if I say anything like that, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So I'm not going to say that. Just the other day, I know we're digressing a little bit here, but I think it is good to digress a little bit just to keep an eye on the big picture. Yesterday I got a Kindle, a Amazon Kindle. I think the price is just about right now. It's still a little bit expensive. I think if they get the price down even more, it would be better. But it's still much better than $300. And the device is fantastic. Okay, if you look at the physical device itself, the display is great. The ergonomics is just great too. The thing is only about this thick. It's about the thickness of a pencil, and it's super light. Okay, it is really light. Some people, one of my colleagues said, oh, you have a book reader that can only be a book reader. Look, I got an iPad. It can be a tablet. It can do all these things. But when you compare the weight of the two, sorry?
His battery doesn't last 2 weeks.
Yeah, not even close. You'll be lucky to have 8 hours out of an iPad.
I think the iPad screen actually hurts your eyes too, compared to the Kindle where it's a special screen that.
Yep, it's e-ink.
Yeah, it won't do any of that.
Yep. And so, but the Kindle is not supposed to be an iPad. The Kindle is only supposed to be a book reader. That's all it's supposed to be, and it does that really well, huh?
It does that very well.
Yeah, it does it extremely well. And the one feature I think is a killer app for the Kindle is text to speech. Okay, because my wife likes to do garden work or do dishes and don't want to waste that time, and she wants to read a book during that time. But you cannot really read a book when you're doing stuff. But using the text-to-speech, technology and using a headphone, she can now just listen to a book, when she's doing yard work or housework and whatnot. So that was a great feature. But the one thing that is not so good about the Kindle is it's really hard to borrow an ebook from the library and read it on the Kindle. It's not because the Kindle does not support Epub or is it mobile? What is the name of that format? I cannot remember. But it's one of the more popular formats used by libraries, and also PDF. Now it can do all these formats, except it doesn't do it in DRM. And when you check out an ebook from the library, most of the time it is a DRM version of the PDF. So you have to use Acrobat. What is the name of that software? Adobe ADR.
Acrobat Reader.
Acrobat is a digital library thing. That you can. It will basically make its own key for DRM purposes. So when you check out a book from the library, it would use your key to encrypt the file. It will also, encode, how long the book is supposed to last or how many times you can read it or stuff like that. So when you open it inside, the the Adobe software, it will do all the enforcement. Okay, after a certain amount of time, the book will quote unquote self-destroy, or is no longer readable. But you can't copy that PDF to a Kindle and use a Kindle to read it. That is one big problem of the Kindle.
Think you can with a Nook? Think you can with a Nook?
You can with a Nook,
Yeah,
yes.
I have a Nook.
Yeah,
It
the
has
Nook
more.
compatibility.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, but the Nook as a physical device, I think it is about the same as a Kindle, but I like the Kindle a little bit more.
I got one.
Does the Kindle come in color?
Hmm?
Does the Kindle come with color screens?
No, the Kindle is strictly grayscale, but it does so in a very, very good way. It's very good at grayscale. There's no color because e-ink, the technology e-ink is really hard to support color type of rendering.
Yeah.
But for the most part, if you use it just as a book reader, it is terrific. I even use it to go to my own website and look up my notes in HTML. It's great for that too. The Kindle has a web browser built into it. Yep. Oh, the Nook too?
So do you have the Wi-Fi one or the 3G?
I only get the Wi-Fi one because
Really?
I don't really need to download books on the go.
Yeah.
And there's no telling when they will actually start to charge monthly for the 3G. Right now it is free, but I don't think the contract says that it will be free forever. So a lot of people will try to abuse that feature and just say, well, I paid $50 as a flat fee, and now I have 3G forever, right? So they try all kinds of stuff to basically abuse the 3G part. When it becomes too costly for Amazon to support that for free, I'm pretty sure they will start to charge like a per download fee or something like that. They will not charge a monthly fee because some people who do not use the WhisperNet at all should not be charged. But they can add a surcharge to the download of the file, right? When you buy a book and you say, I want to deliver through 3G, they'll just say, okay, I'll add like 50 cents, on this book, just for the download fee. So I think that will happen eventually because people will find ways to abuse their free 3G connectivity, and at that time, Amazon would do something about it.
There's enough Wi-Fi available that you don't need 3G.
Exactly.
On the e-reader.
For the most part, unless you're going on a very long trip and you don't have any access points on the way, then 3G can be helpful.
Before you go.
Unless you read a newspaper on the Kindle.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, if you read any type of magazine, e-magazine, or newspaper, like Wall Street Journal and stuff like that, then having 3G can be handy, because on your long trip you can just keep downloading your newspaper, have it delivered to your Kindle every single day.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think Amazon is going to do something more to the Kindle, because if you look at okay, just go to the Amazon website and you can see where they're heading. I think they are not just in the book business, not anymore. If you look at the left-hand side, you can see that they have MP3 and Cloud Player, Amazon Cloud Drive, and the Kindle can play MP3 files. Okay, so I think the Kindle is really an enabling technology so that Amazon can implement all this stuff, to a personal device that is disguising itself as a book reader. Okay, instead of a phone, it is now a book reader.
Can you write things on the Kindle?
You can annotate documents. It has a keyboard. It has a tiny little keyboard. That's not what it's intended to do. It's not an iPad type of device. It's supposed to be a book reader. But I think they're going to merge it. At some point, the book reader is going to be Android based. It's just a matter of time before these two things will kind of merge together. I can see it coming. It's not here just yet. But if you look at the direction that Amazon is taking, I think all of these things will converge at some point.
Well, it was a big move for Amazon to jump onto the Android App Store.
Android App Store and also personal cloud storage. So they're really doing things from a different angle that Google has done already, but they're doing it from a very different angle, which is coming in from the book reader, personal, music kind of angle, and the two will at some point, collide. So these two giants will collide, and I don't think Microsoft will survive that.
They stopped making the Zoom. Just like a month ago, they stopped making the Zoom.
It's really hard to compete in an MP3 market where Apple, has dominance, just because of the user interface, of their product. And on the lower end, you have, SanDisk and all these other smaller manufacturers making really inexpensive devices. There's no space in between for Microsoft to come in.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to happen to Windows 7 Phone too. Windows Phone 7 phone, their operating system for telephones, for cell phones. I think that's it's going to be really, really hard for Microsoft to establish its own presence in that market. It's already, Android is pushing out BlackBerry. As we speak, it's pushing out BlackBerry. So if BlackBerry cannot survive, even though it has a lot of business-oriented apps and and presence, how can Microsoft come in and establish its presence? I think it's going to be hard. Right. Well, let's.
Didn't they just sign like an agreement with Nokia or something like that?
Yeah, but Nokia is not doing any better.
But they've always been like the biggest, right? Up until the whole Android iPhone thing, right?
Yeah, but they're.
Nokia used to be a big thing.
Well, they're still big, but not nearly as big as they used to be anymore. The new companies are Samsung, HTC. Those are the companies that are basically gaining market share really, really rapidly. Even Motorola. I mean, Motorola used to have really archaic, old style phones that are like bottom of the line. They have changed. They have changed. With the Droid, they have changed their approach entirely. So now you have Motorola, you have Samsung, and you have HTC basically dominating all, if not most but not all of the cell phone markets. Where's Nokia? Nowhere. They're nowhere to be found, in phone stores and whatnot. So having Microsoft, to work with Nokia doesn't really mean anything anymore. Yep. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break so that you guys can check with your Kindle and whatnot. We'll be back at 9:35.